Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Hump Day, and thank you so much for joining us. We have some great stories to go into today. Let's get started. Now, look, swing states are probably going to decide the elections, as they tend to, but there's some big shakeups this time around, which could, it's making it look like the blue wall, as people call it, is starting to crumble. And this is, of course, some of the main ones breaking from that are Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. They could flip red this election. They haven't for a couple years, most of them, right? And this flip actually ties into broader issues like the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina and the war in Gaza and the way that that is impacting notably Arab voters as they're watching the, again, policies of the Biden administration reflecting on Kamala. It's a lot of stuff that I don't think many people saw coming. And this tiny little, let's say these small incidents here, well, big incidents, but this collection of incidents is having kind of an eroding effect on this wall. Also, there's a very interesting story coming up from Springfield, Ohio, saying that immigrant students are not being allowed to be given grades below a C. So if you're an illegal immigrant, again, according to some pretty good sources there, you can't fail. I'll be getting to that later. And also House Speaker Mike Johnson, he's now saying a group of around 4.5 million illegal immigrants are going to be the first to be deported in the mass deportations. It seems that they're flagging one group in particular. And again, Trump's saying he's going to do this if he wins. So get your coffees ready and let's jump into it. Now, first of all, there's what's called this so-called blue wall. And, you know, again, some of you may not be from the U.S., but in the United States, of course, swing states really tend to determine the outcome of elections. If you really dig into what determines the outcome of election, well, there's a lot of solid states, right? A lot of people say that New York, for example, is almost always going to vote Democrat because, you know, just the way that New York City is. California is mostly going to vote Democrat. A lot of people assume that Texas will just mostly vote Republican. And again, some of these people say are changing a bit, but for the most part, politicians count on those being stable. There's a handful of states in the U.S. that are called swing states. Swing states are the ones that, well, they tend to go either way. And when it comes down to it, it's not even just swing states, it's swing counties. There's a few counties within these states that basically determine the outcome of the elections. And so for a lot of politicians, there's huge focus on that. Now, in the last couple elections, Democrats have counted on basically winning a few of these swing states. And right now, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, while they went for Democrats last time, it now appears that voters could change their positions. And this so-called blue wall, this, again, swing states that were expected to go one way could go the other way. And if you just go by polling, no matter where you look right now, just about, it looks like it's neck and neck. NBC News said this, right? This is from that side. They say the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have paved the path to the White House for the last two Democratic presidents. But with just 14 days left until November 5th, there are concerns within the Kamala Harris campaign about whether the Vice President, Kamala Harris, can claim all three states. Now, it notes, recent discussions have centered on the possibility of an anomaly happening this year, with just part of the blue wall breaking its way. And it says the conversations have focused on whether Michigan or Wisconsin fall, quote unquote, to former President Donald Trump, while the two other states go blue, according to three sources with knowledge of Kamala's campaign strategy. And so again, anonymous sources, they're not saying who it comes from. NBC tends to be on their side of the political aisle. They typically won't write hit pieces on their side for the most part. And so typically if they do something like this, well, it has a bit more. It says a bit more, right? Now they note that losing Wisconsin or Michigan would mean that even if Harris secures Pennsylvania, where both Harris and Trump have spent the most time and resources, she would not reach the necessary 270 electoral votes in the Electoral College to win the White House without winning another battleground state or possibly two. Meaning this is a real uphill battle. And, you know, basically they could win Pennsylvania and just lose a couple of these other states and still lose the election. Now look, the issue in Michigan, let me just talk about a couple of these blue wall states. Michigan, a lot of people maybe don't know this, but there's a lot of Arab Americans there. There's a lot of Muslims there. And it's showing signs that they could vote against Democrats. For a lot of them, the real divisive issue has been the war in Gaza. NTD, our sister media, they actually interviewed some Arab American voters on the ground in Michigan. Watch this.
The Democratic Party, currently, the current administration, is making it extremely difficult and a moral dilemma for me and us to endorse and give our vote.
I'm torn between voting for a third party and voting for Harris. If she came out and said said that we would stop sending arms to Israel, I think that would make me feel a lot better about my vote.
I'm juggling between third party and Democrat and Kamala, and Trump seen somewhere far behind. Maybe he'll come and save if she doesn't change her position.
There's a few.
Now look, it seems like these concerns are actually just a pretty big focal point. It's not just a minor thing. This is not a few people. This is big enough that it could flip the state. The Guardian said this October 14th. It said that the Trump campaign would open an office in Hamtramck, a tiny city of around 28,000 people north of downtown Detroit, less than a month before the election. Speaks to a particular curiosity of the 2024 presidential race. It says about 40% of the residents in that area are of Middle Eastern or North African descent. 60% are believed to be Muslim Americans. And the city has an all-Muslim city council. Now, in other words, people vote, they have voted in all Muslims, right? The people they vote for. Meaning that's a big issue for them probably. Now note that in past elections, Arab Americans were a solidly Democratic voting bloc. They used to vote Democrat, especially in the years following 9/11 and given Trump's, they say, overtly anti-Muslim rhetoric. Debatable, but that's what they say. And note, but with Kamala Harris reportedly, quote, underwater in Michigan, now 3 points behind Trump among likely voters, having led the former president by 5 points as recently as last month, according to one recent poll. Muslim and Arab American communities across Michigan could play a major role in the outcome of the presidential election. And it says this: angry with the Biden administration and by extension Kamala Harris, because she's the vice president, for its support for Israel, Arab Americans may be willing to overlook Trump's history of closeness with Israel's hard right leaders. Now, there's a bit more to that. A lot of them don't believe the way the war is being handled in Gaza and elsewhere is responsible. A lot of them have problems with it, right? There's different debates on this, I know. But I'm just saying that, again, perception many of those voters have. And the issue is they believe a lot of the weapons are coming from the Biden administration. The Biden administration has tried to kind of play both sides to it. On one side, the U.S. supports Israel full on. On the other side, the Biden administration has actually withheld weapons in some cases because they're saying that Israel's not provided proper plans to avoid civilian deaths. They've tried kind of playing both sides, but the result of that is that both sides are kind of mad at them. They've had a lot of problems with a lot of Israeli Americans. They've had a lot of problems with the Arab Americans, and that's pushing a lot of people over to Trump. Not to mention, again, the perception that a lot of Democrats, not all of them, but especially like the more far left, they've been behind a lot of the protests on the streets, pro-Gaza stuff. And so the Biden administration has been troubled with that because it's creating divisions within their party. Now, note this. Previous elections show that voting in these counties historically runs very close. Now, note that in 2020, Trump won 53% of the Macomb County vote, a community that is home to an estimated 65,000 to 80,000 Arab Americans. Very close victory, right? And note that even within Macomb County, voters are divided. Trump won Sterling Heights, a city home to a large Iraqi community, and notes that he won that by 11%, while Biden won Warren, a neighboring city, by 14%. Now, what's important here, right? Previously, the elections in these areas were close. They were very close. And so what does that mean if some voters are now changing the way they vote because of their perceptions? It means that even a very minor shift in votes in the swing counties of the swing states, which determine basically which direction that whole state goes and could actually determine the way the whole country goes. It means that these states could flip to Donald Trump in 2024. And look, on the other side of it, some people are not going to go vote for either Harris or Trump. We're actually seeing in some of these areas that there's a third party candidate. A lot of them are voting Green Party, and they're just saying, I'm not going to vote for either, and so they're either not voting or voting third party. And so there's also that as well. But remember, for a lot of those voters, if they're voting Green Party, which is what they're doing, that does tend to be on the left side of the political spectrum, meaning that those are probably former Democrat voters or people who might have voted Democrat, choosing to not vote for Trump or Harris. Now look, it's also for this reason that the Harris campaign is now launching ads trying to win back Muslim Americans and Arab voters. This is becoming one of the key battlegrounds. New York Times said, it says, within 2 weeks left to go before the election, Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign is making a final push to win back Arab and Muslim voters. It says the campaign has launched Facebook ads targeting Muslims, created WhatsApp channels, and distributed fact sheets with Ms. Harris's most forceful statements on the war in Gaza. And in private meetings in living rooms and basements across the country, including in the battleground states of Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, campaign workers are trying to reach voters who say they may stay home, vote third party, as we mentioned, or even vote for former President Donald J. Trump because of the Biden administration's policies in the Middle East. Now look, North Carolina is also becoming a big focus with this. It's not just Michigan, right? There's a few different states, but North Carolina is also one being impacted by kind of unforeseen circumstances. North Carolina is also a swing state, and especially with the recent disaster from Hurricane Helene, that could have a large impact on the way people vote. You know, back to that NBC article about the blue wall potentially cracking, it said this. It says that while North Carolina is still in the campaign sights and Democrats maintain strong organization leadership there, the Harris team is far less bullish about victory. It says 4 people with knowledge of the dynamic said this. He said, quote, of all the 7 states, right, these are the swing states, that one seems to be a little bit slipping away, the Harris campaign officials said in North Carolina. Part of this is because Democrats won some of the local elections there, and because they've won the local elections and think they have it in the bag, what does that mean? It means they don't campaign as hard. There's less money campaigning, and they've kind of backed off. So what happens then? A disaster strikes, and if disaster strikes and people look at the response to it, what do they look at? They look at the incumbent government. And who is the incumbent government? Well, that's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, look, Trump actually did win the state back in 2020, but it was close. And with that as well, back to the overall picture of these blue wall states, if even a couple of these flip, not even all of them, just a couple, if they just change the way it happened last time, this could very likely put Trump across the finish line at the Electoral College. Hot Air said this. He said in 2020, Joe Biden won all 3 blue wall states along with Georgia and Arizona, 5 of them, right? Flipping them against Trump to win the Electoral College 306 to 232. And it says thanks to shifts from the 2020 census reappointment that narrows up this year to 303 to 235, a flip of almost any state, along with Pennsylvania, would come close to handing the election to Trump. It says at the moment, however, Trump leads in every battleground state in RCP's aggregation. And notes that Georgia, with its 16 electors, is almost certainly lost, meaning it's going for Trump. And note that Harris has only led in 2 polls there since Labor Day, and Trump's aggregate lead is plus 2.5. That alone is nearly half of the electors Trump needs to hit 270 for the election and win. And as Trump leads in Michigan by 1.2 points. And worse yet, according to them, they say the trend line shifted away from Harris over the last month. And notes that Quinnipiac, not exactly a GOP-leaning pollster, went from Harris +5 in mid-September to Trump +4 2 weeks ago. In other words, it's changing very fast, and it's flipping to Trump. Now, look, of course, polling only says so much. Those of you who watch this show know that I don't often use polls, but there is some use to it, right? It's still useful to pay some attention to it. Oftentimes, the people conducting the polls, well, they tend to jerry-rig things in their favor. But what we're seeing now is that almost across the board, even with polls from historically left-wing organizations, are showing that it's at very least very close with Trump and that Trump is gaining ground. But like when it comes to swing states, the polls, again, are mostly showing Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are very, very close in this race. And keep in mind, too, that while we're talking about Michigan, and again, Muslim American voters there, the issue of Gaza and Israel and the way this is, again, turning a lot of votes, it's not just among Muslim Americans. Actually, a lot of the far left, a lot of Black Lives Matter, for example, a lot of the Democrat grassroots, Democrat Socialists of America even, they have gone very strong on that issue, and they've even been protesting the Biden administration. For a lot of people on that side of the political spectrum, that is one of the biggest issues for the upcoming elections. And that's going to impact the vote in a lot of these different areas, not just in Michigan. That for them is a very divisive issue. And even on the other side of it, the pro-Israel voters, right, a lot of the Jewish Americans and others, they're also concerned that, again, the Biden administration has tried trying to calm down some of the Democrat factions that support the other side of it while trying to maintain support for Israel. But they're looking at the Democratic Party as a whole, not just at the Biden administration. They're looking at the Democrat Party in its entirety. And there are a lot of them maybe not saying they're going to vote for Trump, but they're saying maybe they're not going to vote for anybody, or maybe they'll vote for a third party. There's also that faction, which is becoming very strong as well. And so again, a few of these incidents that have taken place on the world stage are becoming very, very divisive politically. And a lot of the, let's say, pollsters and people working the campaigns, they're having trouble dealing with it. Now look, in other news, there's a story coming out from Springfield, Ohio, where we recently had the cat stories, saying that immigrant students are not allowed to be given grades below a C. You can't fail them. I'll be going into this after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. In other news, there's stories coming out from Springfield, Ohio, the place where the cat story was, saying that illegal immigrant students are not being allowed to fail. Now, with that, right, they're not able to get grades below a C. Blaze Media had the exclusive on this. They said this. They say immigrant students are given a much easier grading scale at a school in Springfield, Ohio, effectively preventing them from failing because they are still considered, quote, English language learners. An email from the superintendent confirms. Now look, in my personal opinion, the purpose of school is not just to graduate. If you think that the moral thing and the kind thing to do is just give the kids an A and pass them along, that's not why you're going to school. The purpose of going to school is to actually learn. And if a policy makes it so that people who fail just pass anyway, then what's the purpose of school, right? I'd say this is undermining, if it's true, right? This is undermining the very idea of what school is. If you try to make it so that nobody can fail, or people of certain groups can't fail, then you undermine the integrity of the education system. And I'd say on that note as well, it's also not being responsible to the students. If you make it so that somebody passes even though they failed, what happens when they go into the real world and they try to get a job and they don't know like basic, things you'd learn in early grades of school? We don't know which grades these are. But if you look at even the literacy rates of kids going into college, you have kids who are graduating from high school who are illiterate. Is that being responsible to them? Is that the kind thing to do? Is it nice to just pass people along even if they fail and even if they're not learning anything? And what happens when you lower the bar that much? Well, you remove the incentive to push yourself. You remove the incentive and the idea that if you don't do well in life that you're not going to make it. You create a false expectation, in other words, of the very systems that kind of make the world, the wheels of the world turn. And you make it sound like everything just has to be handed to you on a silver platter, and if it doesn't, it's being mean to you. That's not the way the world works. Now, look, that said, on a personal note, I'd actually say that vocational programs would be a better solution to this. I know some schools actually offer vocational education for students who look like they're otherwise going to flunk. I know some schools, if the kids are failing, right, if the kids are not doing well, some schools will actually have programs with vocational schools where you can learn a trade, carpentry or welding or otherwise, and they'll actually pull you out and put you in vocational school. I know actually I have several friends who did that. In fact, a couple of my friends in high school, a couple of them actually became welders. One I know learned to operate industrial printers. Some of them were not doing well in school at all, but these dudes I knew, they ended up with really solid careers. Like welding is a great career. They learned it in high school. Honestly, actually on that note too, I did an apprenticeship with carpentry towards the end of high school and shortly afterwards. I actually very much believe in vocational schools. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's true that maybe not everybody's meant to become, an engineer or mathematician, right? I'm not. I was not the best student, just being honest. But people have other skills, and if you have schools that can try to grow those other skills, rather than just make it okay for kids to not push themselves or apply themselves, then I think you're putting them on a path to success. I'm again a big believer that the purpose of education is to set people up to become stable adults, to have a life where they can take care of themselves. And if you're not teaching them to take care of themselves, to be responsible to themselves, to find a career that can sustain them, then you're setting them up to fail. Even if you pass them when they fail when they're young, you are going to make them fail once they're out of school. And that's going to be the one that really hits them hard, not the one where you just got a bad grade. Failing after school is going to affect your entire quality of life. And so personally, if this is the case, and it seems so, I don't think it's responsible. Now, that said, in other news, if Donald Trump wins the election, he's saying one of the first moves he's going to take as president will be to carry out mass deportations of illegal immigrants. Now, some of his quotes that's been taken out of context. You might remember they said, Trump said he's going to be a dictator. The actual statement he had was when journalists are saying, would you be a dictator? And they were, accusing him of that. He says, only for one day. And the implication was that he said that he is going to, again, basically enact laws day one of his presidency to carry out mass deportations. That's the actual implication of what he said that's now been taken out of context. Now, House Speaker Mike Johnson is saying a group of around 4.5 million illegal immigrants will be the first wave to be deported. New York Post said this with an interview with him. It says, should former President Donald Trump win back the White House, as many as 4.5 million migrants, illegal immigrants, who entered the U.S. illegally will be a first priority for deportation. House Speaker Mike Johnson told the Post in an exclusive interview. Now it says that Trump, 78, has already floated the removal of nearly 20 million migrants if he becomes the 47th president. And his closest ally in the House, again Mike Johnson they say, sees an opportunity to fast-track the removal of the most dangerous of the lot. And here's what he says, quote, "There's about 4.5 million who would be the first priority for that, people who have already committed crimes." That's according to Johnson saying this on Thursday. And it says, quote, "They're in the system now for shoplifting or whatever it is, or having done things that are untoward or unlawful." Meaning, he's saying there's 4.5 million criminal illegal immigrants, that they have committed crimes and they're known to have committed crimes, and based on that, they should be the first ones out. That's according to him. Now, look, they say that while the figure, 4.5 million, quoted by Johnson, is far higher than any federal records show, Republicans have noted that the Harris-Biden administration is consistently lowballing immigration stats and ignoring nearly 2 million gotaways who evaded arrest when coming into the country. This is important because actually you have two different sets of illegal immigrants. There are the ones who are trying to apply for asylum and are part of that process. And because they got rid of Remain in Mexico, where you try to come here and you apply and you're allowed to, these days wait in America until that application goes through, which might take 10 years, right? Trump made it so that if you want to apply, you have to wait in Mexico. And a lot of people are saying, well, I'm not going to stay in Mexico for 10 years while I wait for my immigration status to go to court. They changed that, said wait in America. That's one group, right? One group is that very large group that is kind of using the immigration system or using the amnesty system. The other group are people who have illegally crossed. Again, the ones who are not going across and just turning themselves in. These are your just illegal immigrants. And again, one of the issues we have is that there's not even just the recent illegal immigrants, there's a lot of them have been here for a very long time. You have migrant gangs, we have the current ones like Tren de Aragua, but there's a lot of older ones too, tied with the cartels, tied with other organizations, and many of them who have, and again, entered the country illegally, again, not even the ones who came in recently. Previous to the Biden administration, there were already an estimated 11 million illegal immigrants in the U.S. who would be considered illegal. Well, that's a crime, right? That makes you a criminal if you have violated the laws of the country. It's not clear, again, if they're saying the 4.5 million are people who are criminals because they've entered the country illegally. Were that the case, you'd think they'd say, 11 million or more. But again, they're saying now 4.5, so we assume that that's maybe people who have committed crimes in addition to that since being in the country. We don't know, again, where they're getting the numbers from because it's the first time I've seen 4.5 million criminal aliens discussed. But look, as we've discussed before, Donald Trump is saying that if he gets elected, that he does plan to carry out these mass deportations and that he's going to call this Operation Aurora. Now, that's named after Aurora, Colorado, and that's where, again, you saw these videos of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua having guns, going into apartments, and allegedly taking over apartment buildings. That's been challenged. The actual owners of that apartment building have come out and said, yes, this is happening. Now, the plan Trump has, Operation Aurora, that would see him use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Now, the Alien Enemies Act is the only of 4 laws that still remains from the Alien and Sedition Acts. That's again passed way back in 1798, not long after the founding of the United States. The act has been in place since shortly after, again, the founding of the U.S. in 1776. And what that would do, it would give the President of the United States broad powers to carry out deportations of non-U.S. citizens. Now, there's some technicalities on how that works. Some legal analysts might say you need to declare a war on a country in order to carry out such an act. The other side is you could say that we're being invaded by a population, and based on the invasion, you can deport them. There's different ways you could use this. But if that does work, this actually does give Trump the power to do what he says he wants to do. A lot of people say, well, how would they do it? This is it. And again, because this has been in place almost since the founding of the United States, it means that over the course of, again, a couple hundred years, more than that, that this has actually been tested legally over and over and over again, and has actually been enacted a few times in the U.S., even having been expanded at various points within the last 100 years. This would actually do it. This would give Trump the power to do what he says he's going to do. Now look, in other news, the Pentagon has a new plan. The Pentagon wants to launch a clandestine program to create deepfake AI internet users and other online content, and it wants to do so in a way that cannot be discerned from real individuals. You might not know if the person you're talking to online is even real. I'll be talking about this, though, only on EpochTV.com. Also, look, America saw a lot of destruction in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. I was on the ground in North Carolina just recently. I saw a lot of really terrible damage. And, Hurricane Helene and the flood damage it caused in Appalachia showed that disasters can often strike without warning. But there are simple preparations that survivalists often put in place for any such a scenario. When I was out in North Carolina, I met and spoke with E.J. Snyder, reality TV star. You might have seen him on Naked and Afraid. He's also the author of Emergency Home Preparedness. Now, we talked about simple steps that everybody can take to prepare for an emergency. That episode is now available on EpochTV.com. That said, folks, we're going to go exclusively to Epoch TV now. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, join us. Click the link below in the description or in the live chat and come over to EpochTV.com. All right? Make sure you click that link because we're going to jump now.